I'll test it out for Adam too. Can you all hear me? Okay. So one Adam can be heard, the other Adam cannot.
I'm so impressed. So many people have turned out for a public meeting law training.
I think this is a bit of a bait and switch.
Can anybody hear me now?
Yes,
Hey, look at that. All
we
right.
did it.
This is why I should never be anywhere but my house to try and log into a meeting. So,
Where are you, Adam?
oh, I'm at our company headquarters in the Dalles. We're having our annual all staff, Chris. I assume you're driving in tomorrow. So,
I'll be there tomorrow because ABA is also having two meetings, and so we're having Thursday and Friday. So yes,
oh, okay.
I'll be there.
Well,
Yeah.
our team is meeting tomorrow, and then then we have our leadership team meeting in the afternoon, and then the all staff. So we're doing it before, and your team's after. So look at that.
Yes.
So it is a nice day in the Dalles today, like 80 degrees, which usually this time of year it's like 110. So this is great. Do we have quorum? Three, four, five, six, seven. Anderson's eight. Dr. Cousins nine. I think we still might be. Oh, Robin's 10. No, Jackie and Dan and Kyle. Oh, we might. I think we always, Jesus, I think not necessarily because I don't think we're making decisions, but I know folks trickle in a little late. So I just wanted to make sure we gave a little bit of time. But what are you thinking, Nat?
I think so. Let's just move forward. I think I just want to say I'm so happy to finally have met some of the people in person last week at the strategic planning. So I feel like, that just inspires me more to hear what you have to say in person and work on different things together at that planning session. So it's really nice to see you all. So
Well,
I
go
go
for it.
ahead.
This is what happens when our fearless leader, Anna Williams, takes vacation. Okay, I guess we
Would it
just
be helpful if I pulled up the slides or
that
something?
would be great, Christy. Thank you. Yeah, so Anna is on a well-earned vacation post our in person, so that is why she's not here today. And we will do our best to get by without her today. So we'll start with the quick agenda overview. We're just going to go through kind of a roll call and group agreements as we always do. And then we'll do some brief announcements. But the majority of our time today, I think, as most folks know, we have our wonderful guests from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission to come and do public meeting law training with us. Make sure we are all staying in line with that. So there will be training and questions and answers. And then we'll do public comment about 3:30 at the end after that presentation. So we can jump to roll call. So I'll just call in twos as we usually do, and if you could just respond if you are present. So Allison Stark and Sonia Little Deer Evans. Not hearing either. Jackie Serrano and Sandra Santos.
Jackie's here.
No Sandra. Okay. Robin Henderson and Anderson Dubois.
Robin's here.
Anderson is here.
Right. Kyle Johnson and Adam Peterson.
Kyle's here.
Adam's here.
Right. Judge Marisa Gates and Jesus Nunez Pineda.
Jesus is here.
Cutty Mosley and Emily Cooper is excused, so Dan Toma.
Dan is here.
Not hearing Cutty. Cindy Cecil and Ebony Clark. Carissa Cousins and Zafir Michael Berry.
Chris is here.
Zafir is here.
I like that. That rhymes. Jill Archer and Lacey Andreessen.
Jill is here.
Lacey is also here.
I know Annette's here, but we're going to have her announce that anyway. Annette Magicotami and Dana Hiddle.
Annette is here.
Andrew Grover and Alicia Overstreet.
Alicia's here.
And Adam Rodkowski, I am here as well. We do still have the open County Mental Health Program Director seat. I think there might be some movement on that, but we don't have anything to announce quite yet. So I think that is all for that. Annette, do you want to do group agreements?
Sure. Family and youth are welcome to participate in the meeting at any time. Members of the public who are not youth or family members can speak during the public comment period and freely contribute to the chat. You can send a private chat to Joylene Carter, Alicia Overstreet, or myself if you have a comment you want someone to say for you. Group agreements: be present and participate. Varied and opposing ideas are welcome. Challenge ideas, not people. Focus on our purpose of improving the system of care of Oregon. Practice respect, avoid interrupting, and use name and pronouns people introduce themselves with. Honor those with quieter voices, lean in or lean back. Be mindful of power dynamics in the room. Avoid acronyms. Use the chat to write definitions or ask for a clarification. Avoid problem solving for individual situations or crisis, and propose solutions. SOCAC uses the GARE tool to ensure we consider racial disproportionality in all of our decisions. GARE stands for Government Accountability for Racial Equity. It requires us to use the following questions every time we make a decision on policy, program, or budget. These questions have been added to our consensus slide to guide our decisions, and they are: what are the racial equity impacts of this decision? Who will benefit from or be burdened by this decision? Are there strategies to mitigate any unintended consequences? And is completion of the full racial equity worksheet warranted?
All right. Next up, we've got just some announcements. So the Oregon Juvenile Department Directors Association Conference is coming up September 15th and 16th in Eugene. You can see the cost there for the full conference, and it sounds like they also have some kind of varied rates if you're only able to attend part of it. We've got conference details linked there as well as the registration. I think it's at the Graduate in Eugene. It's a pretty cool little hotel down there in downtown Eugene. Encourage folks to attend if that's part of their kind of sphere of interest and knowledge in the system of care. I know it's just happening tomorrow, I think. Is it tomorrow or when or Thursday, Jenny, Canada?
It's just tomorrow.
Okay. So tomorrow, we've talked about this previously, but we've got the mental health IDD conference that is happening in Corvallis, I believe. And so we've sent that out in previous letters. If you haven't registered by now, I think you could probably try and maybe finagle a favor from somebody to at least attend virtually. So yeah, don't forget about that one as well. Next up, we've got just new meeting times. We have listened to you all and shifted our meeting structure from 1 4-hour meeting a month to 2 2-hour meetings a month. We've also moved that back a little bit in the day to accommodate better folks that are maybe not being paid to be here traditionally, right? So that they can maybe take time off from their work, or they're maybe out of school and able to attend. So we're moving to 3 to 5 p.m. twice a month. One meeting is going to be more of the kind of traditional kind of sit and get reports and updates and things like that, gathering and having information provided to us. And then the second meeting in the month is going to be more about our discussion and decision making related to that first meeting. So yeah, new structure. We're excited about it. Hopefully, we are able to also incorporate more folks from the community to be involved and be able to attend our meetings. Are there other announcements or topics that folks have before we roll into our training? Any members of the council have anything for the good of the order? All right, hearing none. So yeah, thank you to the Government Ethics Commission for being here today and catching us at a time where most of our council is available and present. And this meeting is recorded so that subcommittee members can access information. If full members were not able to be here, they can access the information as well. So with that, I will turn it over to our friends, and I'm sorry I don't have the names of the presenters in front of me, but I see Lex maybe is here. So, Lex, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, my name is Lex. I use she, her pronouns, and I am with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. We usually go by OGEC, but I know no acronyms, so I'll try to use Ethics Commission. But let me go ahead and share my slides. So give me just one moment. Okay, should be there. All right, so we'll be talking about public meetings law today. I will also have Charlie joining me today. I think he's a few minutes behind. We get a little bit busy at the Ethics Commission, even in the summer. So he'll be joining on a little bit to be watching for questions and everything in the chat. But we'll go ahead and get started. So public meetings law, it is part of a public meeting, so it will be recorded. So you will be able to view this later. I do just want to point out, there is a training requirement that I'll talk about towards the end. We will send out certificates to those who are here right now watching the live recording. And that are engaging. We just can't send out those certificates to add where it is being recorded. But let's go ahead. If you aren't familiar with the Ethics Commission, just want to give you a little bit of background on us. So we began in 1974. That's when ethics law was enacted into the state. That's Chapter 244, covers things like conflicts of interest, nepotism, gifts, prohibited use of office, all of that. That not only created ethics law, but also created our commission to have jurisdiction over that, as well as our agency to help enforce it. Later on, we also got lobby law. That's chapter 171. That's where lobbyists have to register and report their quarterly expenditures. And then public meetings law came around. So public meetings law actually began in 1973. It was a year older than ethics law, but no one was given jurisdiction of it. In the 90s, our office was given jurisdiction of just the executive session provisions, but it wasn't until September of 2023 that they finally gave us jurisdiction of all of it. So it's a little bit newer. No one's really had control of it for a long time. So we are still finding some areas, finding some gray areas, figuring that out together. But that's why we're able to give advice and trainings on public meetings law today. So the goal of our training today, one, we want to give you an overview of public meetings law. We want you to be familiar with it. It is kind of complex, probably not going to remember everything. We have some resources and things that we'll send out. I know some of the staff shared that beforehand as well. So definitely utilize those. I'll share some other resources as well. And that's a big thing too. We want you to know where you can go when you have questions about public meetings law, because there's going to be questions. Like I said, it's a little bit complex. And then finally, you will meet the training requirement. So when they gave us jurisdiction, they did create a training requirement for some governing body members, not all. Talk about that a little bit later too. But by attending today, engaging in the live training, you'll meet that training requirement. So if you have questions, I expect them. You can utilize the chat feature if you have questions like while I'm presenting. At the end of each section, we will have a question spot where we will pause, and if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question that way, that's going to be where you can do that. And that works a little bit too, because sometimes we'll have a question come up and then we actually answer it the next slide. So it gives a little bit of time to kind of think on those questions. That being said, with it being a training, we do try to focus on more general questions. Obviously, with your group, we're going to focus on some of those customized questions too. But if it gets super specific and it turns out, hey, we really need more details, this is turning into an advice situation, I might say we need to get some advice, like turn this into an advice, so you have you reach out to us, whether that's our email, it's on the screen, mail@ogec.oregon.gov. Again, that's something that'll be emailed to you, or have you call us and things like that. So just being aware, we're going to do our best to answer all your questions, but if it gets too specific, it might turn into advice where we need you to contact us afterwards so we can make sure we get all the details correct. Because you'll hear us say sometimes, it depends, we need some more information before we can give a foolproof answer. All right, before we begin though, I want to ask you all a question of why is your governing body holding meetings in public? Why do you think the reason behind that is? You can put that in the chat if you want, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself, whichever you prefer. Transparency, yes, I see a couple of those coming in. That's probably the biggest answer we get. I like that one. Anything else? Yeah, a law made you exist. Yeah. So you want to, public participation. It's the law, accountability, record keeping. Yeah, these are all great. Okay, so we have a good understanding of that. And to provide opportunity for people with lived experience and other community partners to participate. That's a great answer. Okay, I love all of these. Yes, I see someone interacted with a gold star. Yes, gold stars for everyone. Okay, so we have a really great understanding of why we're here and why this law kind of exists. So we'll touch on that a little bit more. Now, usually we go through a knowledge check to see, hey, what do you already know about public meetings law? Polling system had a few glitches this afternoon. So we are going to skip that portion. We're going to go over the questions a little bit later in the presentation. So you'll still get your chance to answer questions. Don't worry. You'll still have that pop quiz. We're just not going to do that now. So what we're going to do instead is get started with the accountability. And we'll get into more topics too, but the first thing to know is who's responsible when it comes to public meetings law. And so obviously, everyone is responsible for making sure that public meetings law is being followed, right? All the public officials, staff, and everyone who's working on it. But it's the governing body members who are individually responsible for ensuring that public meetings law is followed when it comes to the statutes. And this is regardless of whether you have staff support on certain tasks or all tasks. Staff are not going to be held responsible if a complaint comes before our commission. This also means that governing body members are responsible for both your actions and non-actions. So if you do see something that's not correct, you do want to speak up to your governing or public body to ensure that it is corrected. Just saying that you didn't know something was a violation or like you didn't see a notice doesn't mean that you're not responsible for it. And this also does mean that when we receive a public meetings law complaint at the Ethics Commission, cases are opened against each individual governing body member. And if a governing body member were to be found in violation, any fines issued would be the responsibility of that individual. Fines can't be paid with public money. So just important to remember that responsibility as we move into this presentation on the topics. So what are the topics we're going to be covering today? Well, first we're going to start with your resources. So where you can go when you have questions. Then we'll start looking at the definitions. I will give you a forewarning. This is probably the biggest section. It's a lot of information. But once we get over there, smooth sailing. Then we'll start talking about requirements. So public attendance and location requirements, the accommodations and accessibility of meetings, the meeting noticing requirements, your recordings and minutes. That's about halfway. We'll take a short break there. Just give everyone a chance to, break it up a little bit. And then we'll come back to talk about the executive session provisions, the grievance process, the enforcement of the law, and end with that training requirement. Another thing I want to point out here is that public meetings law is the foundation. So there might be other laws or statutes that layer on top of it, especially as we get into some of these meetings that might have other statutes coming into play where maybe you do have to have public comment on something or anything like that. We are focusing just on public meetings law. That's what is within the Ethics Commission's jurisdiction. So I will try to call out if we are aware that other laws are coming into play, just so you're aware of that, but just wanted to call it out overall. So starting with resources, where can you go when you have questions? Well, first off, obviously you can come to us at the Ethics Commission, whether that's our staff or our website. If you go to our website, it's the oregon.gov/OGEC. We have an entire section dedicated to public meetings law. You can also sign up for additional trainings. We do this public meetings law webinar about once a week. Very similar to this. We did customize a little bit for what some of the questions you had and took out some of the relevant slides, but it's very similar to this. Giving it weekly, so if you ever need a refresher, you can sign up for it there. That's also where we house all of our references, handouts, guides. So those will be emailed to you after this, but if you ever want to check in on those or you can't find it in your email, you can find it on our website. And lastly, if you ever need advice on a situation for public meetings law, ethics law, or lobby law, you can request it on our website. Now, talking about advice, we can give advice on things that are future or hypothetical situations. Basically means we can't give advice on things that have already happened because someone could have submitted a complaint and we really can't change your actions you've already taken, right? But we do have different levels of advice and each offers a different level of safe harbor protection if a complaint were to be filed. So definitely a good thing to do. If you have a meeting coming up and you're not sure about something, reach out to us. We can give you advice. You follow the advice, you have that level of safe harbor protection. Depending on the level, it will also be reviewed by our executive director. We have our compliant enforcement coordinator, and some like our advisory opinions even get reviewed by our assistant attorney general. But we're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can give us a call, send us an email, make a request on our website, or if you're ever in Salem, you can even come into our office. I will just say if it's about a meeting that's coming up within like the next 24 to 48 hours, please give us a call so we can make sure that's high priority. We also have the Oregon Administrative Rules, OAR. These are the rules adopted by our Ethics Commission that kind of clarify and give extra guidance on the statutes. Our chapter is 199. Specifically, we have Division 50 for Public Meetings Law. That was published in October of 2024. So that has everything to do with public meetings law. And then we have Division 40, that's executive session. Again, we have had executive session since the 90s, so kind of has its own division since it's been around longer. Now, outside of the Ethics Commission, the Attorney General's office puts together a public records and public meetings manual, This is a resource we do recommend for every governing body member, something us in the office use on a daily basis.
Lex froze, right? It's not just me.
Yep. Like
Okay.
it for me too.
This is the first test.
Well, we will wait. I don't think so, Jesus, but you never know. These trainers are sneaky. Sometimes they work in those opportunities, to see if you're paying attention. Perhaps, yes. Well, so while we wait, did our in-person retreat in Salem convince anyone that they wanted to move to Salem? Were you all like blown away by everything that Salem had to offer?
Loved how everything was walkable. The restaurants were really great. Park was amazing. With all the different things that they have going on. It was nice. Not quite at the moving level when it comes down to it. I'd have to have more stuff that draws me down to Salem work wise, but in terms of the family oriented stuff, our family had a great time. That was amazing.
Nice. It was nice to meet them, Anderson. So I'm glad they had the opportunity to be there. Annette didn't seem convinced either. I think she was laughing at me when I said it. Okay. All right. Well, we're doing what we can down here. We're trying. Well, the little city that could. I think we got Lex back.
Yes, I am so sorry about that. My Zoom just decided to be done. So I am back. Here, let me share my screen again. I'm so sorry.
No worries, you're fine. I can fill time with the best of them. So I've got your back.
All right. What did you last hear from me? Because I'm not sure where it cut out exactly. Okay. Where the AG manual, does that sound about? Is that where you last all heard, or did it cut out a little bit sooner than that?
Yeah, no,
How
you
does that-
just started on the AG manual.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So yeah. Okay, perfect. AG manual. So this is from the Attorney General's office. They put together a public records and meetings manual. It's something we do recommend for every governing body member. Our office uses it on a daily basis. They have a free PDF version, or you can order a hard copy. I want to say last I checked, it was like $60. It's a pretty big book, but you can use the free PDF version, and we'll link to that. What's really great is that it is both public records law and public meetings law. We can only give advice on public record or public meetings law because that's within our jurisdiction. So it's nice that it includes public records law as well. But it's updated the most recent 2024 version. Only thing to know is that it does not include some of those rules from that 2024 session, just because they were already in the final editing process when we got done with the rules. So you'll want to be looking at the rules and that Attorney General's manual, but it is a great resource. Definitely recommend that. And then, of course, if your governing body has legal counsel, or if you're part of an association, those two options would also be resources for you to reach out to if you had public meetings law questions. So that's going to be some of the resources for you. The next thing we're going to look at now is definitions. And one of the questions we might ask ourselves is, when do we need to hold a public meeting? And might have a pretty good answer of pretty much always, but we should probably start with what even is a meeting under public meetings law, right? So public meetings law, defines a meeting as the convening of a governing body of a public body for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or to deliberate toward a decision on any matter. So one of those definitions that gives us a whole bunch of terms to further define. So we're going to look at each of these separately, but we're not going to start with number one. We're going to start with number 3, public body. So public body, as you can see on the screen, state government bodies, local government bodies, special government bodies. But the definition is a little bit broader than that. So public body is the state, any regional council, county, city, or district, or any municipal or public corporation. also includes any agency of those bodies. So boards, departments, commissions, councils, bureaus, committees, subcommittees, or advisory groups are public bodies as well. If you're ever not sure if something is a public body, you can just ask whether it was created by or pursuant to like the state constitution, a statute, administrative rule, order, bylaw, or other official act. The only thing to know is that a single public official, like the governor, is not a public body under public meetings law. But then we also have governing body. So the governing body is 2 or more members of any public body who have the authority to make decisions for or recommendations to a public body on policy or administration. If you have a department headed by an individual public official, that's not going to be a governing body. But we typically see governing body versus public body. So an example at our commission, our 9-member volunteer commission, they're the governing body. Our agency is the public body. City council would be the governing body. The city is the public body. You can see different variations of that. We can also further define governing body into 2 different types. So we have 2 types, decision-making bodies and advisory bodies. Now, both still have some kind of effect on the public body and its policies or administration, but they do it in different ways. So decision-making bodies, can kind of tell the title there, they have the authority to make decisions. That often includes having the the ability to exercise governmental power and act on behalf of the public body. So things like city councils, county commissions, state boards and commissions, fire district boards, those are all examples of decision-making bodies. Then we have advisory bodies. Instead, their authority is to make recommendations. They're often formed by a public or governing body that can also be created by legislation. But again, their authority is to make recommendations, and those recommendations are going to be made by group or vote. So some examples could be budget committees, advisory committees, ad hoc committees, school districts, site councils. I know with you all here, you have kind of your one big council as well as a few different subcommittees. And so there's that kind of, whenever we talk about subcommittees, we always get that question of, do they count as governing body? Like, where do they fit in with this? So subcommittees, it kind of depends if they meet that criteria for advisory bodies or not. So the criteria is being formed by the public or governing body, making recommendations, that's their authority, and if they're making those recommendations by group or vote. So if you're forming these subcommittees to make recommendations to you by group or vote on something, then they're going to fit that advisory body definition. Therefore, they're their own governing body. They're going to have their own quorum, and they're going to have to meet all the, follow all the requirements of public meetings law as well. So, and if you're ever not sure of that, that's a great time to reach out to us at the Ethics Commission for advice. Give us all the details about the subcommittee, what they're doing, and we can say, yeah, that definitely fits the advisory body, or actually, based on what they're doing, that doesn't fit making recommendations. We can help you figure that part out. Because there are 2 types of bodies that are not governing bodies, and those are fact-gathering bodies and bodies advising individual public officials. So for fact-gathering bodies, these bodies only have the authority to gather and provide purely factual information to a public body. They don't have the authority to make decisions or recommendations. So you'd just be, gathering information, presenting it to the public or governing body, not making any recommendations or decisions. That might seem pretty easy. We still have to be careful there, because if we are presenting, going to get this information ready, and in looking at the information, we make the decision, our little committee makes a decision of, hey, this is the most important information. We're going to leave that information out. We don't need to present it. That could be construed as a recommendation. So again, not always the easiest line to determine. Great time to reach out to us for advice if you're ever unsure about that. And then that second one, advising an individual public official. This one also has specific criteria to meet if, to be not a governing body. So specifically, the body is going to be appointed by an individual public official. It's only going to make its recommendations to that individual public official. And that individual public official has to be able to act on those recommendations, and doesn't need to be like pass them on to the public body unchanged. So again, very specific criteria there for it to meet that. And I know I've said this so many times, but if you're ever unsure, please reach out to us for advice. I think that's one of the biggest areas we do give advice on for people trying to figure out if they do fit into that advisory body or one of these not a governing body categories. So we're happy to help you with that. All right, so we got public body and governing body. Now we can look at quorum, which is a much simpler definition. It's just the minimum number of governing body members needed to transact business. So most governing bodies have a policy, bylaw, or other directive saying what their quorum is. For example, our commission has a rule saying we have 9 members. It says our quorum is 5. So that's what our quorum is. But if you don't have a rule or policy, it's just going to be a simple majority. So if we had a 10-member board with no policy, that majority would just be 6. I know we have a bigger council here, 25 members, if I'm correct. So your quorum is probably closer to 13. You can share that in the chat with me if you want to. That'll help me with a further question. Question will come up later, but you probably have a bigger quorum for that. All right, quorum is good then. So now we can talk about convening. Convening is going to bring up a couple different definitions here. So we'll spend some time with this one, starting with communication. So communication, probably all very like, yes, we know what communication is, but I would just want to touch base on all the types of communication covered under public meetings law. So communication itself, expressing or transmitting information to another person. That's through verbal, nonverbal. This does include gestures, so thumbs up, thumbs down, sign language, written or electronic means. So text messages, emails, all of those. Everything's going to be covered under this communication and public meetings law. Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you for answering that. Perfect. All right, so now that we know communication, we can look at convening, because this is the different ways that governing bodies gather and communicate. Now, it could be gathering in a physical location, could be using technology to communicate in real time, like we're doing right now with Zoom, or it could be using serial electronic written communications, or even using an intermediary to communicate. And we're going to go over these last two a little bit more because there have been a lot of questions about them. So we'll start with that serial communication. So serial communications here. This is a series of communications of any kind, whether directly or through intermediaries, that happen outside of a meeting conducted in compliance with public meetings law. So it could be an in-person conversation, telephone conversation, video conferencing, written communications, again, emails, texts, social media posts, all of those count here. If you're talking through intermediaries, we'll cover that next, or any other means of conveying information. What's most important when it comes to serial communications is that they are prohibited when a quorum of governing body members is using serial communications to deliberate or decide on any matter within the governing body's jurisdiction. So you cannot have a quorum of governing body members deliberating or deciding on a matter outside of a public meeting. That is a prohibited serial communication. Now, I know one of the questions had been brought up beforehand when I was talking with staff to prepare and make sure we had some of this customized for you all, was just discussing things by email. Where is drawing that line, right? And so again, the most important things here is we cannot have a quorum deliberating or deciding on anything within the governing body's jurisdiction outside of a meeting. So just being careful with emails. If you have a vote coming up on something and maybe a member emails someone else saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking about voting about it. What are you thinking about voting it, right? That could become a prohibited serial communication if it reaches a quorum and you are definitely deliberating or deciding by talking about how you're going to vote on an item. We'll talk about those definitions next. I know a little bit out of order there. But to become that prohibited serial communication, that communication needs to reach a quorum, which I know some people were sharing in the chat that, yeah, we have a 13-member quorum for the full, but then our subcommittees have much smaller of like 5. So obviously, if you're talking about subcommittee matters, getting to 5 amongst an email is a little bit easier than 13, but just being careful, because if you've emailed someone and then they went and emailed someone else about that conversation, they become an intermediary and we could still reach quorum that way. So let's talk about intermediaries now. So an intermediary, this is just someone who relays information from one person to another. When we're talking about serial communications, it's whoever is facilitating those communications, amongst governing body members about that deliberation or decision by the governing body. So an intermediary could be another governing body member, could be a staff member. Just remember that if it is a staff member who's helping facilitate those communications, they're not going to be responsible if a complaint comes before the commission. But so continuing that email example. So if you did email someone and then that person emailed 3 more people sharing, oh yeah, hey, they let me know that they're thinking about this. I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Then that person is the intermediary in that case, and they've shared your conversation. Even if you didn't know, if that reaches quorum, that would still be a prohibited serial communication. So we do say that best practice is to keep, any conversations about deliberating or deciding on matters within your jurisdiction to public meetings as best you can, just because there is that chance with intermediaries and sharing conversations that it can become that prohibited serial communication. But when we are trying to define that line, prohibited serial communications happen when we have a quorum deliberating or deciding on governing body matters outside of a public meeting. And we do have an FAQ that we just put out because we had a lot of questions on serial communications, which I understand. It's a big thing. We do have an FAQ that we shared, and we'll share that after with an email as well. But if you have any questions of that, put them in the chat. We can definitely go over it more, but hopefully that gave a little bit more insight into that and didn't confuse you more, hopefully. All right, so now let's talk about decisions in deliberation, because I did use those words a lot. So let's make sure we understand them as well. So decision, one of those things that, yeah, we know what a decision is, but it also has a specific definition under public meetings law. So this is when a vote of a quorum of your governing body is required to take an action. That could be a determination, vote, final disposition, or some other action on a specific matter. So typically we see motion, orders, proposals, measures, ordinances, or resolutions. But you have those 3 things happening: a vote of the quorum on an action for a specific matter. That's a decision under public meetings law. And now we have the decision-making process, which is the process your governing body is, engaging in to make that decision. Typically, we see it as a 5-step process, which we'll outline on the slide, starting with step 1, identifying the decision that needs to be made. Step 2, gathering information related to that decision. Step 3, identifying and assessing any alternatives. Before step 4, considering that final information. And the final step of step 5, making the decision itself. And this decision-making process is important because it leads us into deliberate, which deliberate is just the discussing or communicating that's a part of that decision-making process. So, and when we say discussion, that's just considering or debating the matter. But so even if you think, we're not making the decision itself, if you're anywhere within that 5-step process, that decision-making process, you are deliberating. So just being aware of that, especially when we're considering prohibited serial communications. But that means we've gone through all these definitions. We know what a meeting is under public meetings law. Now we're going to really quick talk about the different kinds of meetings that are applicable to public meetings law. So we have regular meetings. These are just your regularly scheduled meetings. Special meetings, any meetings outside of your regularly scheduled meetings. Emergency meetings, meetings you have to hold because of an actual emergency. Executive sessions, we'll talk about these a little bit later, but these can be held as a standalone or as part of any of those first 3 meetings. And then these last ones, we typically see them called work sessions or workshops, but they're usually held for the governing body to have information presented to them to prepare them for a regular or special meeting, or sometimes to even engage in preliminary discussions or deliberations. But we're definitely in that decision-making process. We're definitely deliberating in there. So these do need to be held in compliance with public meetings law as well. All right. So now that we've covered everything inside of public meetings law, let's cover some of the things outside of public meetings law, starting with a few types of communication that public meetings law does not apply to. So there are three types. The first, communication that's purely factual or educational in nature. It's going to convey no deliberations or decisions that might reasonably come before your governing body. So one example would be this training right now. You wouldn't necessarily have to hold this training as a public meeting because, again, purely factual and educational, it has nothing to do with any of your deliberations or decisions. So that would be okay. Obviously, our commission, because we make decisions on public meetings law, we'd always have to hold in a public meeting because that is something they deliberate and decide on. So you can kind of see where that can be contextual depending on what it's informational about. But that's one example of communication that public meetings law does not apply to. Second one is communications that are not related to any matter that at any time could reasonably be foreseen, to come before your governing body for deliberation or decision. So a lot of times when we're talking about this, and the Attorney General's manual also has a section on this, social gatherings and events, as long as there's no discussions about official business. So your governing body, if there's an event going on in the city or maybe, some kind of gathering happening and you do have a quorum of members that would like to attend, that would be fine, again, as long as you're not discussing official business. There's a little part, just again, remembering the public perception of such gatherings and just really being careful that you aren't discussing anything, because if you did have a quorum of members there and you did start discussing official business, that would definitely need to be a public meeting. But as long as that communication is unrelated to deliberations or decisions, public meetings law would not apply. And this last one is pretty easy, just anything that's non-substantive in nature. So typically we see these as things for like scheduling or logistics. So if staff sent out an email to everyone that said, hey, don't forget tomorrow's meeting, here's the link to join, and a member hit reply all saying, hey, I actually can't make it tomorrow, I'm so sorry. That's not going to be prohibited serial communication, even a hit reply all. It's non-substantive, right? It's only if someone hits reply all and starts talking about how they're going to vote on the next item. We're probably getting more into prohibited serial communications there. But non-substantive information, that's going to be public meetings law, does not apply to that communication. So on top of those communications, there are also two situations that are not meetings per the law. The first, any on-site inspection of a project or program. Again, you could go to the project or program, you can talk about the project or program, you just can't talk about anything that you'd be deciding or deliberating on. So if there was another council, this one's hard to think of a specific, but if you were talking about the project or program and, you can talk about the details of it, but as soon as it starts talking about like, what can we do with our budget to make this possible at one of our sites, that's where it gets more into, okay, now we need to have a public meeting about that conversation versus having it here. So it's kind of an example there. And then the second one is you can have your governing body members attend a national, regional, or state association to which the public body or its members belong. I went a little fast there, apologies. But yes, so as long as your public body or governing body is part of an association, your governing body members are allowed to attend any gathering for that association. We typically see this more with like Special District Association has their yearly gathering, OSBA conference, League of Oregon Cities, those kinds of examples we see more for this one. Again, you'd be able to attend those, talk about the topics, but if it gets very specific into things your governing body's making decisions or deliberations about, you'd want to hold back to wait for a public meeting to have those conversations. So, all right. So going back to our initial question, when do we need to hold that public meeting? Well, we know by the definition that when we have a quorum of a governing body, of a public body, convening in order to make a decision or to deliberate toward a decision on any matter, we have a meeting. And our Oregon form of government actually requires an informed public. They want them to be aware of the deliberations, and decisions that our governing bodies are making and the information upon how those decisions were made. So really this means that our meetings held by governing bodies need to be open to the public, and that meetings can only be closed when specific statutes allow it. So those executive sessions we'll talk about later. But the purpose of public meetings law is to make sure that governing bodies make decisions in a way that is open and transparent. So when we asked at the beginning and everyone was answering transparency, accountability, and it's the law, everyone got it right. That is definitely the intent of public meetings law. All right. Like I said, that is probably the longest section we have here today. Any questions on definitions? I'm going to scroll through the chat, see if we have anything. But if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, now is a great time too.
Hey Lex, just give you a heads up. I'm out here in the world, so if
perfect.
anyone wants to throw a question in the chat, this is Charlie. I'm one of the trainers from LGEC. You can throw it in the chat.
Awesome, thank you, Charlie. Okay, yes, I see a hand.
Okay, so I guess my question is about the quorum and serial communication and quorum and emails. So let's say we have a subcommittee that has 15 members, or 15 people that are part of the subcommittee. There's a question, let's say there's a question that's posed in an email. At what point does the quorum come into play? Does it mean that if let's say I answer the question, that's assuming it's a substantive question, right? Not a non-substantive question, but a substantive question. I answer, or I respond to that question and I hit reply all. Is that a quorum, or does it become a quorum once we have, because now we have two people involved, right? The person that asked the question and myself. Or does it become a quorum once we have three other people chime into the conversation and all of them hit reply all?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I will say that is a very specific situation, because I will say using reply all is very scary when it comes to serial communications, because that does get you very, very closer to everyone being able to reply and get you much closer to that quorum. I will also plug in, definitely looking at the FAQ, because there are situations like if staff is reaching out with questions and just like on 101, it may not necessarily reach that serial communications because you may not necessarily be deliberating or deciding. But if there is a way showing that a quorum did deliberate or decide, and in that it would either be, they did participate in the conversation. And some examples we've had to, not necessarily even someone commented back or, replied back, but even if someone shows that they liked the message, that could potentially be an input of, yes, I agree with that. So that could also be, I know it's also hard because every email provider is different. So that would be if it comes before the commission, that's just something they're going to look at. I can't necessarily say right now yes, that would definitely, again, it depends on the provider and how that works out. But we would be looking at a quorum participating. So did they react? Did they give some kind of input? That's kind of what we'd be looking for there. But the commission would have kind of the ultimate determination of that, because it does get a little bit interesting when we have different providers and how that works with that. But does that kind of answer?
Sort of.
Serial communications, I will be 100% honest. We're still figuring that out. We do have a couple of cases before the commission. So we will definitely see this continue to evolve. But I would just be careful with the reply all, and just being aware of that quorum and making sure you don't have a quorum deliberating or deciding, inputting deliberations and deciding outside of a public meeting. Another hand. Adam, yes.
Yeah, it's on serial communication also.
Okay.
And I think you might not, I hate to bring this into it, but I am local to Salem, and so I know that there is some situations with our city councilors and our mayor around serial communication. So can you be an unwitting, unknowing participant in serial communication? Because what if I am calling 5 different people of a subcommittee asking them their opinion, but not together, just separate? Stephanie's jumping in don't answer that. But I'm just curious. It's complicated, right? It's I didn't know that, somebody was asking for other people that necessarily. So how does that play out?
Yeah, and I think Stephanie, you would like to answer.
Yeah, and you are correct. I was jumping in to say, don't answer that. So at this point, we can't provide really that additional clarification. That is something that the commissioners are going to have to work through. We do have serial communications in a work session coming up this week at our commission meeting. So right now, we can't get into it more than that, especially with an active case that is involving that. So that is something that we're waiting to see how the commissioners decide.
Okay. And so then at that point, you could forward that on to our staff so that they can pass it out to us. Like, here's officially how that scenario plays out. Because we are all, this body of 25 folks, we have so much like overlapping work outside of this council, and this council is so broad in its scope. It's hard to know what is in bounds and what might be out of bounds. So that's why I asked that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely a valid question, and we will be providing, as the commission makes these determinations, we will continue to provide information on public meetings law specifically. I encourage everyone to sign up. I will put in the chat for our newsletter specifically on the public meetings law topic, so that when we are issuing additional information that you're getting those updates. So I'll add that to the chat in just a moment.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Okay, I don't see any other hands. So we're gonna go ahead and go through these questions. Like we said, we had some tech issues. So what we're gonna do is have everyone answer in the chat. It won't be anonymous. That's the only thing to know. But we're gonna have you answer in the chat. And for this first question, who is responsible for making sure that meetings follow public meetings law? We have A for staff, B for governing body members, and C for staff and governing body members. And I want to say who is statutorily responsible for making sure that meetings follow public meetings law. So if a complaint comes before OGEC, who's going to be responsible for making sure that complied? Okay, see a couple different answers coming in. Okay, we are all over the board with this one. All right, I think that has seen everyone. Okay, so this one is the one we covered at the very beginning, and it is governing body members. So again, even though, yes, we are all responsible for, what's under our job titles, we might have staff helping with noticing and things like that. It is the governing body members who are responsible for making sure that public meetings are complying with public meetings law. And if a complaint comes to OGEC, that's who will be who will appear before the commission. Yes, you cannot blame Anna. You got to make sure you as governing body members have to make sure it is complying with public meetings law. So, all right, next question here. So what determines if a subcommittee is an advisory body subject to public meetings law? This is members are appointed by a public or governing body, and A, the purpose is that the individuals will make their own recommendations. B, the purpose is that the individuals will make recommendations by group or vote. C, the purpose is purely to gather facts and make no recommendations. Or D, all of the above. So this is the criteria for advisory bodies being governing bodies subject to public meetings law. Awesome. Trying to give a little bit of quiet while everyone answers. Okay, looks like we are getting resoundingly the same answer on this one. Yes, it is B. We want to make sure that, yep, we're being appointed by group or vote. Nice job. Okay, last one here for this section. Governing body is using a Google document to do collaborative work outside of meetings. Members can edit this at any time. Is this a violation of public meetings law? We have A, yes, this is an example of serial communication, and a quorum has access to contribute, edit, and review what has been shared outside a meeting. B, no, because while all the members can edit the document, the content will be discussed at a future public meeting. Or C, no, because in addition to the governing body members, the public also has access to this document. All right. See a couple different answers. I do have a lot of A's coming in though. Okay, so let's see what this one is. And yes, this one is A. So it is an example of serial communication. And if a quorum is contributing and, deliberating or deciding, commenting back and forth on some things, then we would definitely have a prohibited serial communication here. So being aware of that when we are collaborating on like Google Docs and things like that. All right. Nice job, everyone. All right, so now that we've covered definitions, we're going to start looking at some of the requirements for public meetings law. So these provisions might be something that staff or administrative staff are helping us with when we talk about public attendance and meeting location requirements, the meeting accessibility, the noticing requirements, the recording and minutes, and the grievance process, which Charlie will actually be doing some of the training at the end. We'll kind of switch it up, make it exciting still, so you don't have to listen to me the whole time, and he'll be covering that grievance process.
Lex, we do.
But again, oh yeah.
We do have a question in the chat. So in that last scenario, if it was less than a quorum in the document, would the Google Doc be okay?
Yeah, so again, when we're talking about prohibited serial communications, it is a quorum. So it could potentially not be a prohibited serial communication if a quorum is not deliberating or deciding. If you just have to be careful because, again, with intermediaries or things, it can be easy to reach that quorum. But yeah, by definition, prohibited serial communication does have to have a quorum. So if you have less than a quorum, it wouldn't be a prohibited serial communication.
So
but if it was shared between, shared to get up to that quorum, that's where it can easily become one. So it would.
That's what I was going to ask. So, I'm trying to make sure I understand this. So let's say there were 12 of us on a doc, and we were all like, don't share this with anybody else because it would be a violation. And then I was like, well, Annette really needs to see this. So I add Annette, and that hits 13. Who then is in violation? Me? All 13 of us?
So in that case, by definition, prohibited serial communication is everyone who participates in the prohibited serial communication. Again, we might see some changes as we continue moving forward, but as the definition reads, or as it has gone so far, every governing body member who participates in that communication would be found in violation, likely. Again, the commission makes final determinations, so
yeah,
it would be up to them. But
I want to ask one more clarifying piece there, and maybe Stephanie has something to add, but let's say, again, right, there was 12. I add Annette because she really needs to see this. Adam Peterson was one of the first 12, but does not contribute after I add Annette. Is he still in violation? Because I'm bringing him down with me.
I'll let Stephanie jump in too to make sure, because I know we're just in a really weird area right now.
Yeah, totally. Fair
Stephanie, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, of course. These are all really great questions that the commission is looking at and discussing. So right now, what would happen is that every governing body member would have a case opened against them, and the commission would look at each person separately. So whether or not they were added to the document would be something that the commission would look at. Whether or not they actually were opening it or editing it, that would all be facts that would be presented to the commission to make that determination. But at this point in time, we cannot say whether or not that would be a violation. The other point I want to point out, though, that this question makes me a little bit leery in that, you're talking about the council as a whole, but at this point, have you created a subcommittee? Because the subcommittee has would have its own quorum, right? And in itself would be a governing body if it's making recommendations or decisions, but recommendations to the main council. So that
Oh,
would
yeah.
be something else that I would caution is in creating this group, have you created a subcommittee that is then making recommendations to the council?
Well, we've
And
got
then that subcommittee would be considered a governing body and subject to public meetings law.
we have subcommittees on subcommittees, Steph. Got them
Exactly.
all over the place.
So
Okay.
that would be so Lex is 100% correct. In order for it to be a prohibited serial communication, there does have to be that quorum. But do keep in mind that we're not just talking about the council itself, but we're also talking about the quorums of all of the subcommittees as well.
So thank you. I think that makes sense, and I appreciate so in that would game out that like everybody would be investigated, and you would certainly hope that like there would be like some logical thought and investigation process that would determine people's intent and participation. So fair enough. There's another question in the chat. So we have optional debrief spaces for young people with lived experience and also family members who are part of our committee and subcommittees. They are having those discussions in smaller groups after our main meetings, but they aren't making, at least I don't think, I'm not a part of those, making decisions in those spaces. Is there any risk to those?
Yeah, so I would say this probably falls into, and let me clarify, are those members the people you're talking to from like the public, the youth, they are members of the committees or just involved, like more constituents, or they are members?
Some of them are members of the full council, many
Okay.
more are members of subcommittees as well.
Okay.
So there's a blend.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie, yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I think this is an excellent question, and I hate to be this way, but I do think that because that one is so fact specific, that it's going to take a little bit more analysis than we can provide in the training. So I would encourage you to write in for some advice. Then we can assign one of our staff members to take a look at it, and we can have a more collaborative discussion before providing a response to make sure that we're in alignment with what our commission's deciding, we're in alignment with our DOJ counsel and all of those pieces. Because I think that that's a very interesting question we haven't really been confronted with before.
Sounds good. Thanks. We can make a note to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, awesome. So yeah, it sounds like we will have a follow-up from you all with some advice questions to get a better answer on that. So thank you. Like I said, serial communications are an interesting topic right now. But yeah, let's go ahead and continue on with the requirements of the meetings. And then if you have any questions on those, continue putting them in the chats with the requirements. And then we'll touch base on the end of each section with those. And Charlie will be watching the chat and answering them as well. So like I said, with some of these requirements, they are sometimes more administrative. Staff may be helping or doing them entirely, but as governing body members, knowing that you are the ones responsible for making sure they comply, you should still be checking in and making sure that they do comply. So we're going to look at the public attendance and meeting location requirements first. Like I said, towards the end of that last section, all meetings of a governing body do need to be open to the public, and all persons need to be permitted to attend, except as otherwise provided in the statutes. A quorum of your governing body cannot meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating toward a decision on any matter except as otherwise permitted in the law. Again, those executive session provisions we'll talk about later. Do also want to touch on public comment and disruptions here before we get too much further into the section. We do tend to get a lot of questions on this, But generally, public meetings law does only require the public be allowed to attend the meetings, not that the public actually be allowed to comment or testify at meetings. Now, this is one of those areas where public meetings law is the foundation. So there might be another statute, or you might have a policy, or just by your own choice decide that, yes, you want to, allow public comment or testimony and have your own procedures for that. That's fine. Just know that all that public meetings law says about public comment is that it's up to the governing body and the presiding officer to maintain the decorum of the meeting, and that you can limit public participation accordingly. So another time, I'll also refer back to that Attorney General's manual. They have a little bit more information on this. So if you ever have questions, I definitely look at that as a resource as well. Let's talk about the meeting location requirements to make sure that the public has access to our meetings. So no meetings can be held in a place that discriminates on the basis of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, age, or disability. So just making sure we're holding our meetings in locations that aren't discriminating. Also need to make sure we're holding it at a place that is accessible. It is discrimination to meet in a place inaccessible to persons with disabilities. You can find more information on that in the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. That's on ada.gov. Another resource we'll send out to you. Now, it's also discrimination to fail to make a good faith effort to have an interpreter for persons who are deaf or hard of hearing if they're requested for a regularly scheduled meeting. So what does that request look like? Well, the person requesting the interpreter needs to give your governing body at least 48 hours notice for that request. We'll talk about this in the noticing section, but that's why it's important to notice your public meetings with as much time as possible. The request needs to include the name of the person making the request, their sign language preference, and any other relevant information that the governing body may request. Now, if a meeting is held with less than 48 hours notice, the special or emergency meetings, reasonable effort shall be made to have an interpreter present, but the requirement for that interpreter does not apply to emergency meetings. Now, for requests for deaf and hard of hearing services, you can use the Oregon Department of Human Services website. That's shown on the screen on that slide. This is a link we'll also send in that follow-up email, so you have that available to you. Now, for in-person meetings, where should you be holding that meeting? Well, your governing body should be holding its meetings within the geographical boundaries of its jurisdiction. That could be at its main office or administrative headquarters or nearby. And if you are a state, county, city, or special district group that has that's within land owned by a federally recognized Oregon tribe, meetings can be held within that territory as long as it's within the geographical boundaries of the state. Now, obviously, for a state group or state council, the geographical boundaries of the entire state, so that's pretty easy. Other groups, sometimes it's not as easy for them to figure out, so they can check with administrative staff, charter, or legal counsel. What do you do if you're ever in the situation where you have multiple governing bodies meeting, or maybe even meeting with like the elected official of a federally recognized Oregon tribe? Whose jurisdiction would you meet in? Well, in that kind of situation, you just choose one of the jurisdictions to meet in or the nearest practical location. Now, in the event of an actual emergency, meetings can be held in locations other than those described in the law. Emergency isn't defined. It does use the wording of actual emergency necessitating immediate action. So typically bigger things, floods, fire, weather events, those kind of things, what we're talking about here. And then training sessions. These can be held outside your jurisdiction as long as no deliberations toward a decision are involved. So just making sure you're not having those conversations about deliberating or deciding, and your training session can be outside of your jurisdiction. Now let's talk about electronic and telephone meetings. So all of your meetings, including executive sessions, can be held virtually. That's totally fine. Of course, public meetings law still applies. And if you're going to only hold your meeting virtually, so whether that's electronically or by telephone, you need to make sure that you are still providing the public a place, whether that's in person, like a physical place, or one of electronic means where they can listen to the meeting in real time. So again, that could be electronic means. So that could be a call-in number, a link to the meeting like a Zoom or a video feed, Or if you're doing in person, that could just be a room where the public is able to come and listen to it in real time, whether it's on the screen or if it's a telephone that has been called in and they can listen to it that way. Now, regardless of how your meeting is held, to the extent possible, your governing body needs to provide the public access to that meeting to attend virtually. Again, that can be a phone number to call in, meeting link to join via Zoom like we're doing now, or a video feed. And for governing bodies that are going to allow in-person or written testimony, they must also allow the public to submit oral testimony virtually or written testimony electronically. Just making sure we have that equitable access option for that virtual testimony. And then this last one, this is more for executive sessions. We'll cover it a little bit later. But an executive session is one that you could choose to have entirely in person and not have a virtual access option. But if you are going to let anyone in the executive session attend virtually, even a member of the governing body, then you need to give the media that same attendance option. So just making sure that the media has that same attendance option for executive session. Again, nothing in that subsection prevents you, the governing body, from establishing reasonable security measures. You just have to give them that same attendance option if you are having a virtual executive session. Now with media, one of the questions we usually get asked next is who counts as media? Well, OGET cannot define media. We would point you in the direction of the Attorney General Opinion 8291. This has several factors kind of laying out who would qualify as media. And just let you know that ultimately it is up to each governing body to determine if an individual meets the requirements in that Attorney General opinion. Your governing body is also fine to adopt application or procedures for individuals to be recognized as media. Just know that you can't tell media they can't come into executive session because they didn't do your application procedures, or you can only tell them that they can't come into executive session if you don't think they meet that definition by that Attorney General's opinion. If a complaint were to be filed regarding someone not being given executive session access because they're media, ultimately, our commission is going to look at whether your governing body's decision was reasonable in light of those Attorney General opinion factors. So getting a little bit ahead of it because we'll talk more about executive session towards the end, but just wanted to cover that since we did bring it up in that last slide. All right. Any questions on public attendance and location? Don't think I saw any in the chat, but if anyone wanted to raise their hand and come off mute to ask a question, now would be the time. Oh, Stephanie, yes, I see. You want to add?
Oh, sorry. I forgot to lower my hand. I'm good.
It's fine. Happens. Anyone else? All right. I'm not seeing any. That's fine. Okay. Then let's go over this question together. Again, you can answer in the chat if you'd like to. So what accommodations are you required to give under public meetings law? We have A, meet in an accessible location, B, meet in an accessible location and provide an interpreter if requested no matter what, C, meet in an accessible location and make a good faith effort to provide an interpreter if requested at least 48 hours before the meeting, or D, nothing is required. All right. Yeah, I see a lot coming in. Okay. And yes, looks like everyone's doing really good. We all answered C. Yep. Need to make sure we're meeting an accessible location and making that good faith effort to provide that sign language interpreter if requested at least 48 hours before the meeting. All right. So now we're going to talk about noticing. Again, something that staff might be helping with or doing entirely even. But just knowing that as governing body members, we still need to make sure we're checking notices before meetings and making sure they're complying with public meetings law. So in order for the public to be aware of a public meeting, your governing body needs to issue a public notice to the general public and to interested persons who have requested notice. That also includes members of the media who have requested notice. For regular meetings, this needs to be issued within at least 48 hours before the meeting is held. A lot of governing bodies are getting that out sooner. Sometimes, again, if you're holding a meeting for a specific reason that has other statutes involved, you even have, a different timeline to follow. But that minimum is at least 48 hours before a regular meeting for this public meeting notice. So we know we need to get it out 48 hours. Where are we posting that notice? Well, to satisfy the notice requirement for the general public, it needs to be posted in an obvious place on either the public body or governing body's website. So that's one big requirement. Now, state agency board and commissions and educational service districts are also required to post to the Oregon Transparency website. This isn't a requirement for you, but if you wanted to post there, other public bodies are welcome to. It's basically one big calendar of Oregon open meetings going on. And then, so if this is for people who don't have a website, or to satisfy that, answering interested persons, to make sure you're getting the notice out to them. Other options are posting the newspaper, community and bulletin boards, posting on social media accounts, again, sending out an email or mail. Those ones are ones you kind of see most often for, interested persons saying, yes, I want to be notified of this meeting. You can send an email or send it out in the mail to them. Those would be those options. Okay, so we know when, where, now what is going to be on that notice? What's required of us? Well, needs to have the date and time of the meeting, needs to have where the meeting is being held. So that would be both the physical location if you're having an in-person, or the virtual information if it's online. Also needs to have the list of subjects being talked about at the meeting. This can just be a list of subjects, or it can be your agenda. If you do have your agenda, that does not limit your ability to amend, add to, or even remove up to and during the meeting itself. So you're still able to amend that. And it also needs the contact info to request that interpreter or accommodations. For that specifically, it needs the name, telephone, and email address of the person they should be contacting for that. And then finally, again, we'll talk about this more in the executive session section, but if you are going to be going into executive session, it should have the citation of the provision you're entering under. This is especially important if you're having a standalone executive session, or your executive session is coming before your open session. So here's an example of one of our older meeting notices. As you can see, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It really just has to have all that information in one place for the public. But it has our Oregon Government Ethics Commission meeting agenda at the top, and then it goes into date and time. This was a November 1st, 2024, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Goes into our address, has our physical address, and then all the teams information if they want to join online. Then it goes into our accessibility and accommodation request, short little paragraph there, and it has Becky's name, phone, and email to contact her if you need those. And then it goes into our list of subject of discussions. That's our agenda, much, much longer. Cut it off here. But really just showing that you need all of that information in one place. All right, special meetings, same thing of when, or not when, excuse me, where it's being posted and what needs at least 24 hours notice. And again, special meetings are anything outside of your regularly scheduled meetings, excuse me. And it needs to be going to the governing body, the news media, and the general public. And the last meetings we'll talk about in this section are emergency meetings. So in the event of an actual emergency, your governing body can notice an emergency meeting with less than 24 hours notice, but you need to notice as soon as possible. You need to still contact the media and interested persons, and you still need to post the notice as usual. So still posting on your website, wherever you're sharing with your interested persons, if that's social media or sending out an email, still making sure you're doing that. And then finally, the minutes for that meeting need to describe the emergency that justified that less than 24 hours notice. So fine to have those emergency meetings, but you need to make sure you do those extra steps there. All right, that's it for the noticing requirements. I don't think I see anything in the chat. Did anyone have a question they wanted to come off mute and ask about noticing? All right, I don't see anything. So we have one question here as well to check in. This one, when time for all meetings, B, within a reasonable amount of time for regular meetings, 24 hours before special meetings, and as much time as possible for emergency meetings. C, at least 48 hours for regular meetings, 24 hours before special meetings, and as much time as possible for emergency meetings. All right. See a few answers coming in. Looks like we are all agreeing again. Yeah, definitely for this one. Yes, we are needing to make sure we post those at least 48 hours before regular meetings, 24 hours for special meetings, and as much time as possible for emergency meetings. Nice job, everyone. Okay, last section before we take a short break, and then Charlie will take over. This one's going to be about recordings. So recordings and the minutes requirements. Again, something that staff might be helping with, but we as governing body members need to check in and make sure it is complying. So your governing body is required to provide documentation of all its meetings. That can be in a sound, video, or digital recording, or written minutes. Now you can choose, you can do multiple. We as a commission like to do multiple just in case tech fails and we have a backup, right? But you do need to make sure you have at least one as your official record. Now, if you are doing written minutes, full transcripts are not required, but the written minutes do need to give a true reflection of the matters discussed at the meeting and the views of all participants. Whether you're doing minutes or recordings, they need to be available to the public within a reasonable time after the meeting. In addition, with written minutes, they need to require some specific information. So the names of the governing body members who are present, any motions, proposals, resolutions, orders, ordinances, measures, and their results that happened during that meeting, the results of all votes, and the votes of each member by name. And so this one, because one of the questions was what happens right now, your council is currently sitting at 25 members. What happens if you grow beyond 25? So this vote of each member by name is required unless you have more than 25 members. So right now, 25 members, this is required of you. If you grow to more than 25 members, that wouldn't be required of you unless a member asked that you still do it, then it would be required. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go into voting, but just wanted to point that out since that had been a question. You also need to include the substance of any discussion and then reference to any documents discussed during the meeting. So voting. All voting has to be done by a public vote in the meeting. Cannot use secret ballots. It's not allowed. Need to make sure that you're recording the results of all votes. This does include the vote of each governing body member by name. That's the part I was talking about, the 25 members. So if you are using written ballots as well, the ballot does need to identify the name of the governing body member, and then the vote, including the member's name, needs to be announced during the meeting where voting happened. So some questions we've got: can a governing body vote by email? Well, if it's happening outside of a meeting, no, that would basically be a secret ballot. If you're emailing during the meeting, you need to make sure, again, that would kind of be like a written ballot, right? You need to make sure that would be being announced, who is voting how. Like, you still need to follow those rules, so it could potentially be allowed. If you're setting up something and you're not sure, definitely a great time to reach out to us for advice and we can cover that. Now, when it comes to the vote of each governing body member by name, we've got a couple questions of, well, can we still do consent agendas, right? Just everyone, all vote in favor, all vote opposed, that kind of thing. We do typically say that best practice is a roll call vote with that voting of each governing body member by name. Makes it go a little bit faster. But if you are doing consent agenda, totally fine. Just need to make sure you're still recording the vote of each governing body member by name. And that'll depend on how you are keeping your minutes, whether you're doing the written minutes or recording your audio. So for written minutes, you can be fine in the meeting itself just to say, vote all in favor. And then the chair or whoever is announcing the vote could just say, like, if we had a motion passes unanimously, could just say motion passes unanimously. But the minutes themselves would have to say motion passes unanimously. In this case, I'm going to say a board of 5 on the minutes. So that's how you would do that with written minutes. Now, if an audio with the minutes has said and say it out loud. So the chair or whoever's announcing it would say motion passes unanimously, board members A, B, C, D, and E in favor. So that's where if you're using the audio or video recording, we do say that best practice is a roll call vote, makes that go a little bit faster. But if you have questions on that, let us know. Great time to reach out to us for advice too. All right, though, that does bring us about to the halfway point. So we have covered all of this, and I think we did just get a question in the chat, so I'll check that. So we've covered resources, definitions, tenants, requirements, accommodation and accessibility requirements, the noticing, and the recordings and minutes. We're going to next cover executive sessions, the grievance process, the enforcement, and training requirement. Usually we take a break and then do questions, but seeing as we're still talking about recordings, I'm going to actually answer this question now because we're all here right now. Might as well. So the question is, regarding meeting minutes, how do members reconcile? Oh my gosh, that word, reconcile. There we go. Information they may feel does not accurately represent their contribution to the meeting. Can this be done via email to staff, or does it require the member to wait until the next public meeting? That's a great question. I will say there's not necessarily anything in public meetings law that dictates this. This is going to be more of your governing body's own policy on that. You definitely want to make sure that yes are correct. That is where public meetings law is saying minutes need to be correct. How to correct those though, that's going to go more to your governing body's policy. So I would probably check in with your staff to just ask which they prefer, if it needs to be an email to staff or that needs to be brought up when, sometimes you vote on approving minutes. Maybe that's where that needs to be brought up. I would just check with your staff to see which one they prefer because that's going to be your governing body's policy. So good question though. Okay. All right then. I don't see any other questions. So we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. It's 2:03 right now, so we'll come back at 2:13, and then Charlie will take over to go over the rest of the presentation, and I'll be watching the chat. So we'll see you back at 2:13.
Special meeting or an emergency public meeting, or it can be its own standalone executive session. So let's take a look at this, the executive session part, when it's part of a regular meeting. So during the public meeting, if any governing body members have a conflict of interest on an agenda item that's going to be discussed in the executive session, this needs to be announced during the public meeting, okay? After that, the presiding officer needs to make the announcement in public that the governing body is having an executive session. Okay, so this announcement needs to include to cite the specific reasons and statutes for entering into executive session for each subject that's going to be discussed. Now, if you intend on coming out of executive session to take your final action or vote, you need to announce when that open session will begin again. Now, you need to also specify if any individuals may attend the executive session. Now, also you want to add that instruct the media or any additional specified attendees what may not be disclosed in the executive session. Okay, so if you do not specify this, the media may report on everything. Now, if you happen to discuss matters other than what you've cited, the media may report on these additional items as well. So just please keep in mind that there are times when news media may be excluded from the executive session, and we'll talk about those when we get to those citations. All right, so during the executive session, you want to make sure that the conversation is limited to only the topics that were cited as a reason for going into executive session. No final decision can be made in executive session. You'll need to come back into open session and take that final vote, that final action. Now, if you're coming back into open session, if you did not specify a time when you would, when you went into executive session, when you would reconvene in open session, then you just open the door and announce everyone that you can come back into open session. Now, if you did specify or you did announce a time in which you would reconvene in open session, and you come out of executive session a little bit early, then you'll need to wait for those folks to show up before reconvening in open session. Now, if you come back in open session unexpectedly after previously announcing that you would not reconvene in open session, then you may be required to make that final action postponed for another properly noticed meeting. And then after the meeting, just make sure you keep minutes or a sound, video, or digital recording of all your executive sessions. Now, the Attorney General Manual does give an example script that can be used when you're convening into executive session during a public meeting, and it basically breaks it down like this. So the first paragraph just states the governing body's entry into executive session, and then it cites the specific statutes for going into that session during this meeting. So don't list all the provisions, only ones that apply to your meeting. Now, the second paragraph addresses the attendees. This could be news media and designated people as well. So, as well as the folks that need to leave the room. Now, paragraph 3 provides guidance on what not to report on. Paragraph 4 acknowledges that no final decision will be made in executive session. And then lastly, it states when the meeting will return to open session and when the audience is welcome to rejoin to finish up that at the completion of the executive session. Now, executive sessions can only be held when permitted by a specific provision of the law. So for the most part, the executive session provisions in 192.660 are optional. Okay, so that means that the governing body isn't required to hold an executive session to discuss these topics. The exception would be when there are other laws like HIPAA or FERPA or a specific federal or state law that may require confidentiality. So some of the executive session provisions have prerequisites or other requirements. We'll talk about those here in a bit, but those provisions must be met before an executive session may be convened. Now, the topics discussed in executive session must be limited to those topics expressly permitted by specific provisions under which the executive session was convened. All right, so Oregon Public Meetings Law gives specific permissions for governing bodies to consider, consult, discuss, deliberate, and review specific topics in a meeting or a session that is closed to the general public. So what's not allowed is holding executive session for the purpose of taking a final action or making a final decision, unless an exception in the statutes applies. Now, can a governing body discuss how they're going to vote in executive session? So it's likely that the folks that are in the governing body may reach consensus in executive session, and all the members will know of that consensus. Okay, but the purpose of final decision requirement is to ensure that the public is aware of the results of the decision. Okay, so a formal vote in open session satisfies that requirement. So even if that public vote merely confirms the consensus that was reached in the executive session. So we have created a handout breaking down the executive session provisions and the prerequisites to those provisions. We have organized them into the following categories. So we have confidential records and litigation, hiring and employment, negotiations, security and safety, and there are provisions that are used less frequently. So this reference is available on our website, and we'll also be sending you a link with this information as well. So let's talk about this first one, which is exempt public records. Now, a governing body can hold an executive session to review information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection. So to enter executive session under this provision, the information or records must be expressly exempt by law. So this includes federal and state statutes on confidentiality. Now, information and records that are exempted are listed in public records law. That's in RS 192.345 and RS 192.355. So an example of a record that could be reviewed under this provision would be reviewing attorney-client privilege documents. Okay. You can use this provision to meet with your attorney in executive session. However, there needs to be a written record such as a legal memorandum. So some more examples of confidential records or exempt records from public inspection would be confidential student records, test and examination materials, contract proposals, bids, workers' compensation claims, public records pertaining to litigation, trade secrets. So always refer back to public records law for that part. All right, so there is one provision that allows a governing body to enter into executive session to consult with their legal counsel. And this is so long as the attorney is included in the meeting. This is either in person or by telephone or by other electronic means. Now, this provision allows the governing body to discuss with counsel their legal rights and duties with regard to current litigation or litigation that's likely to be filed. This exemption does not apply to litigation that has been concluded. Now, the Attorney General recommends that public bodies invoke this exemption only on the advice of legal counsel. Okay, and the idea here is the purpose of this exemption is to place governmental bodies who are parties to or potential parties to litigation to have an even footing with private parties. Okay, this means that the governing body should be able to engage in these private and candid discussions with their legal counsel about the legal issues raised by the litigation. Now, discussions can include procedural options, as well as substantive analysis of the legal merits and the risk and ramifications of that litigation. Remember, no final decisions can be made in executive session. Those must be done in open session, and media is permitted to attend these sessions. Now, the only time media cannot or can be excluded is if they are party to litigations being discussed in this executive session. Okay, so if it's or if they're an employee, agent, or contractor of the news media organization that is party to that litigation. All right, so next let's take a look at hiring and employment related provisions. So the executive session provisions for employment allows for the governing body to meet in executive session to consider the initial employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent. This provision does not authorize decision, deliberations, or discussions of other employees' actions, such as performance evaluations, complaints, disciplining, termination, or the extension of an employment contract. Now, when considering the employment of an agent, this refers to an individual person, not a firm or a company. So an examples include an attorney, an accountant, or other individual who would perform services on behalf of the public body in the capacity of an agent. Now, even if the agent works for a firm or company, okay, so if the agent works for a firm or company, this provision can only be used to consider the prospective individual. Now, while a governing body can meet in executive session to discuss the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent, there are multiple steps that must be taken first. So the first one is a vacancy for the position has been advertised. Regular hiring procedures have been adopted. And in addition, if the employment is for a public officer, the governing body needs to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on the filling of that public officer's position. So it does not require that the public be given an opportunity to comment on named candidates for the position before the executive session is held. And for chief executive officers, the governing body has adopted hiring standards, criteria, policy directives at a public meeting where the public has had a chance to comment. Now, you cannot discuss or you cannot use the provisions to discuss the filling of an elected position when it becomes empty, or the filling of a vacant or public committee, commission, or other advisory group, or discussing general employment policies, or discussing an officer's salary. So lastly, no final decision can be made on a candidate in executive session. The governing body must return to a public meeting before taking that final action. And so we did create a handout that is made for the hiring in executive session with all the prerequisites. Again, this is something that will be emailed to you after this training, and it's also available on our website. Now, a governing body can also hold an executive session to consider the dismissal or disciplining of a public officer, an employee, staff member, or individual agent, and may also hear complaints or charges brought against such persons. Now, however, the governing body is required to provide written notice to the affected individual within 24 hours before the executive session. Now, they can request an open hearing in RS per 192.660 subsection 2 subsection B. Now, an open hearing in this context just means an open session. So we'll talk about what needs to be included in that written notice here in a minute. But first, there's some other provisions that kind of have the same requirements. So one of the questions we've gotten, I have here on my screen, is can this provision be used for complaints against fellow board members? And the answer to that is it depends. It can only be used if the governing body's charter or enabling legislation allow the governing body to discipline or dismiss their fellow board members. All right, so governing body can also convene an executive session to review and evaluate the job performance of a chief executive officer, other officers, employees, and staff. However, just like disciplining and dismissal provisions, this only applies if the individual whose performance is being reviewed and evaluated does not request an open hearing. So let's take a look at this written notice. So in order to provide an affected individual with a meaningful opportunity to request an open hearing, the governing body is required to provide them with a written notice of the executive session before the meeting. Now, this written notice must be provided at least 24 hours or 1 business day in advance, and it must include identification of the governing body before which the matter will be considered, the time, date, and location of the meeting, the purpose for which the governing body proposes to convene an executive session, and the information on how the public official may request an open hearing. So although this provision requires an open hearing, if the person involved so requests, we do not construe this provision to be required as an adversarial hearing, but as an open session. So the affected person need not be present and has no right to postpone the hearing to permit an attorney to attend or to have a formal hearing unless another law, contract, or collective bargaining agreement provides those rights. Now, you cannot use the executive session for the following discussions. The first one's going to be, you cannot use provisions A, B, or I to conduct general evaluation of an agency goal, objective, or operation, or any directive to personnel concerning agency goals, objectives, operations, or programs. Also, you cannot discuss compensation. This includes salaries and benefits, must not be discussed or negotiated during the executive session. Now, an example I have here is a city interviews a candidate for a position of a city manager in an executive session held under ORS 192.660 subsection 2 subsection A. The governing body wishes to discuss non-salary compensation with the candidates, including access to a city vehicle and membership to a professional organization. This is not permitted in executive session. All right, so there's 4 provisions that are related to negotiations, labor negotiations, real property transactions, and trade and commerce negotiations. The first one we're going to talk about is labor negotiations. So a governing body can hold an executive session to confer with their labor negotiator. And this is to conduct deliberations with a person that's been designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. Now, this subsection allows the governing bodies to request members of the media to leave. So in addition, the exception involving labor negotiations, ORS 192.660 subsection 3 states that labor consultations are to be considered in an open meeting unless negotiators for both parties for the governing body and the employees request that the negotiations be conducted in executive session. So also labor negotiations held in executive session under this provision are not subject to the notification requirements listed in public meetings law in ORS 192.640. So a governing body may convene executive session to discuss the negotiation of real property transactions with individuals the governing body has designated for the purpose of negotiating real property transactions. Note that this provision does not allow the governing body to discuss negotiations with the person they have designated to conduct the actual negotiations. Hang on, I misread that. Note that this provision does allow the governing body to discuss negotiations with the person they've designated to conduct the actual negotiations. Real property transactions are not limited to the purchase or sale of real property. For example, negotiations for a long-term lease transaction undoubtedly would be included within this provision. Now, this provision does not include discussion of a public body's long-term space needs or general policies concerning lease sites. The executive session must be limited to discussions of negotiations regarding a specific real property. And while the board may come to a consensus about whether to accept an offer, they will be required to conduct a final vote in public meeting. All right, so trade negotiations. This provision allows the preliminary negotiations involving matters of trade or commerce to be conducted in executive session when the governing body is competing with governing bodies in other states or nations. So you can use this provision. It is permissible when the governing body knows or has good reason to believe it is in competition with other governing bodies or nations regarding the matters to be discussed. This provision does not apply when the governing body is in competition with other governing bodies in Oregon. So next up is security and safety. Some of these do have some new provisions. All right, so ORS 192.660 subsection 2 subsection P is to consider matters relating to cybersecurity infrastructure and responses to cybersecurity threats. This is new for 2023. Now, ORS 192.660 subsection 2 subsection O is to consider matters relating to the safety of the governing body and the security of the public body's facilities and meeting spaces. This is another one that's new for 2023. This is limited to the discussion of the safety of the governing body, its staff and volunteers, and the security of the public body's facilities and meeting places. So we've tried to pick the most likely provisions that would be used by the governing bodies that take this training. This training does not cover all the executive session provisions. If you have any questions regarding any of the provisions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us before you have your meeting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about media. Members of the news media are generally allowed to attend the executive session. So I mentioned earlier that media can be asked to leave the room when you're meeting an executive session for one of the following reasons. And so the first one's going to be when the governing body is conferring with their labor negotiator. When the executive session is being convened to discuss the expulsion of an elementary or secondary school student. The session is in regards to confidential records of a student. Now, members of the media who are party to litigation or are an employee, agent, or contractor of the news media organization that is party to the litigation must be excluded from the executive session that's being held to discuss litigation with legal counsel. All right, so there's a lot of stuff we covered. We created a OGEC handout for you folks on executive sessions, their prerequisites and other requirements. They've been broken down a little bit easier to see, but you will be receiving a link to this post-training, and it's also available on our website. All right, so you're now in executive session. I have two examples of how things may not go according to plan and what you need to do as a governing body member. So the first example is your public body enters into executive session, but now the conversation has moved beyond the scope of what was cited as a reason for having the meeting in executive session. Now, members of the governing body may not discuss topics in executive session other than those that were cited in ORS 192.660 or other state law permitting an executive session, even if the additional topics are related to the issue for which the governing body convened in the executive session. So what do we need to do if the conversations are outside the provisions that have been cited? Well, if the governing body member is in an executive session and realizes that topics being discussed are unauthorized or exceed the scope permitted by the statutory provision cited, that governing body member should state their objection to discussing the unauthorized topic. Now, if the discussion continues to be on this unauthorized topic, then announce on the record that you are leaving the executive session. Now, last part of that is going to, it's kind of counterintuitive, but you need to leave the executive session, okay? Now, the idea here is, even though you know that the governing body is not following the law, you leaving the executive session will be on the record that you were not part of that conversation. That's your proof, and that would protect you from any fines that were imposed if a complaint were to be filed, okay? So just a reminder that we are independently responsible for the governing body following public meetings law, and that any fines issued will be issued to the persons independently, not to the governing body as a whole. So this is my first one. I got another one for you. Next situation is you realize you have a conflict of interest on an agenda item while you're in executive session. Now, conflicts of interest are part of Oregon government ethics law. So we're not going to get into all the details of what a conflict of interest is, but I will point out to you that you do need to make a public announcement of your conflict of interest. So what do you do if you find yourself in executive session and you haven't publicly declared your conflict of interest? So you need to stop the meeting and let the members of the governing body know that you have a conflict of interest. And at that point, you have two options. You need to either leave the meeting before the governing body starts any discussion on the matter, or the governing body can table the agenda for a future meeting to give yourself a chance to probably declare your conflict of interest during an open portion of the meeting. So this is regardless of whether there's an actual conflict of interest or potential conflict. Conflict of interest is on the ethics side of things. If you need more information on that, please reach out to us. You can reach out to the Oregon Government Ethics Law. You can also look at the Guide for Public Officials, which is on our website. And we also offer trainings on all that as well. So, all right, here we are. Any questions on executive session? That seemed like a lot of information.
No questions in the chat.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, then I have a poll for you folks. All right. So before entering into executive session to evaluate the performance, discipline, or dismiss, or to hear complaints or charges against an individual, a written notice must be given to the affected individual. What are the requirements of that written notice? And choose all that apply. And I guess throw them in the chat. I think that's how we're doing it this time around. Give y'all a moment to answer. Dan's out the gate pretty quick. It looks like y'all are all following Dan's lead. So all right. Just kidding. I like that. That counts. That counts. Just kidding works. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. If you're still working on it, don't worry about it. Let's go ahead and knock this out. So what do you need to send the affected individual? There's a couple things here. If you chose send at least 24 hours in advance, identify the governing body, tells the reason for convening an executive session, tell them how to request an open session, then identify the date, time, location of them. Okay, so the one standing out here does not require them to have an attorney present, and it does not need to be sent by official mail. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the grievance and complaint process. This applies to all of public meetings law, not just executive session. So a new grievance and complaint process. This started in 2023. Now individuals can file a grievance with the public body before they file a complaint with the Ethics Commission. So alleging a violation has occurred, not just of executive session provisions, but all of public meetings law. So with this comes new requirements for public bodies. All right, so the grievance notice, the public body has some requirements to let the public know when, where, how, and to whom a grievance can be filed with the public body. The public body needs to post on their website the person and contact information to whom a grievance may be submitted and the regular business hours during which an in-person grievance will be accepted. Now, in the absence of a designated person, the grievance may be submitted to the public body's chief administrative officer or to the chair of the governing body. Now, if the public body does not have a website, then they need to provide notice who the contact person is and the hours they will accept the grievances in the same way they notice their public meetings. Public bodies are required to accept grievances that are filed in person during business hours, by first-class mail, by email, or any other way it deems appropriate. So first, we're going to take a look at the grievance process, and this is going to be from the point of view of a person who thinks the governing body has violated public meetings law. And so before folks can file a complaint with the Ethics Commission alleging there was a public meetings law violation, they are required to file a grievance with the public body first. So if the person believes the public meetings law violation has occurred, they must first submit a written grievance to the public body at issue, stating the facts and circumstances of the alleged violation. Now, this written grievance must be submitted to the public body within 30 days of the date the alleged violation occurred. Now, they must give the public body 21 days to respond to your written grievance. So now let's take a look at how the public body needs to respond. So notice that public body names the public body needs to be responsible, not the governing body. Okay, so it's all about the public body here in this response. So the public body receives a written grievance from a person alleging the governing body may have violated public meetings law. The public body must provide a written response to that person within 21 days. That person must acknowledge receipt of the grievance, and the public body needs to send OGEC a copy of that written grievance along with their response at the same time it sends their written response to the person. And the email address you're going to use for that is going to be pbgr@ogac.oregon.gov. Now, this email address is also on our website under Public Meetings Law section. Now, if the public body receives a complaint and you're unsure how to respond, we recommend reaching out to the Ethics Commission. Now, let's take a closer look at each type of these responses, which is deny the facts, deny the violation, admit the facts, deny the violation, or admit the facts and admit the violation. So option one is deny the facts and violation. This is where you deny the facts and circumstances that are alleged in the grievance, then describe the public body's version of the facts and circumstances, and then explain why they do not violate public meetings law. Now, option number two is the public body to admit the facts and circumstances that are alleged in the grievance, but deny that those facts and circumstances violate public meetings law. Now, option number three is to admit the facts and circumstances that are alleged in the grievance and admit that those facts and circumstances violate public meetings law. You then need to explain the steps that the public body will take to cure the violation. So this could be something as rescinding the decision that was taken by the governing body that violated public meetings law, or to hold a meeting within 45 days of the original decision and acknowledge that the original decision violated public meetings law. Good cause exists for the governing body not to rescind that decision, and the governing body's practices will be modified to ensure that future violations of public meetings law do not occur. So regardless of how the public body responds, once the grievance process has been completed, the person who has filed the grievance can now file a complaint with the Ethics Commission. So after the 21-day period, they can choose to submit their complaint to the Ethics Commission. So they must include documentation that they satisfy these mandatory prerequisites. So this documentation would include their written grievance and the public body's written response or affirmation that no response was received within 21 days. Now, if they fail to satisfy these mandatory prerequisites before filing their complaint with the Ethics Commission, their complaint will be dismissed. All right, so when it comes to complaints, first and foremost, we only accept signed complaints. For public meetings law complaints, we will open a case for each member of the governing body in preliminary review. So the cases will be consolidated at the preliminary review phase and the investigative phase, unless one or more members of the governing body object to this consolidation. So at the conclusion of either the preliminary review or the investigation phase, the commission will make individual determinations regarding the case of each member of the governing body. Now, only OGEC's governing body, the commission, can determine if a violation has occurred, and will also determine what the sanctions for any violations will be. So any questions on the grievance and complaint process?
I have a question or a comment.
Yeah.
I think you said that grievance has to be made within 30 days of the alleged violation, which, as I'm a very devious person, so I figure if I do a really good job with my violation and we have our meeting in super secret and it never comes out until 9 months later, then did we get off scot-free?
Ooh, that's a great question. So very fact specific, because if you had a secret meeting, that leads me to other things. So very shady. Okay, so that's a great question. And that is one that's going to be very fact specific, because if you guys are having meetings and no one knows about them and they can't file a complaint, that's something that that we would need to give you better advice on, that I would not have a good answer for you in this situation. Unless Stephanie's back there behind the scenes, knows what that answer would be right at the top.
I think she might be here, but I just wanted to, there is potential. Yeah, that 30 days does make it a little hard in some of those situations. Obviously, it also depends on on the what the issue is, like the meeting itself, yeah. If you kept that hidden, that would be an issue. But like the minutes for that meeting, potentially them asking for it later and you not having it available, that could potentially bring that up to, within that 30-day time frame. But yeah, there's not a great answer for that one. I would definitely don't do that.
Yeah.
I would say don't do that.
Please.
But yes, how the grievance process is written, it does need to be within 30 days of the alleged violation. So you are correct with that.
Yeah, let me just add. So if you're not devious like Dan and you're doing everything like you're supposed to, then yeah, that 30 days does apply. So you can't come back 90 days later, after the meeting notice has gone out. It all went down as planned. It all went down as public meetings law intended. And then 90 days later, you decide, you know what, I don't like what they said in there. I'm going to file agreements on the meeting they did 90 days ago. That's not going to fly. Okay. But if you're going to be devious, that opens up a lot of other things. So that I'm not going to discuss in this training. All right.
Thank you.
So go ahead. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into a poll question real quick. All right. So your public body has received a public meetings law grievance. What is the public body required to do? And you can throw this in the chat in any letter. A, the public body is not required to do anything. It's the governing body's responsibility. B, the public body needs to respond to the grievance within 21 days. Or C, the public body needs to respond to the grievance within 21 days and send a copy to the Ethics Commission. All right, yeah, I'm seeing it. Looks pretty good. All right, I'm gonna go ahead. They're coming in quick, so I'm gonna go ahead and call it. Let's see what you got. C, yeah, you nailed it. Perfect. Awesome, great job. All right, so let's keep going. So let's talk about the sanctions for violating public meetings law. Dan, I hope you're listening to this part. OGEC's highest priority is education. I'm giving you a hard time. But OGEC's highest priority is education. Okay, so most often the commission will issue letters of education or make you attend additional training. Okay, so however, individual governing body members could be assessed a financial penalty of up to $1,000 for public meetings law violations. Now, separately from the grievance process or the OGEC investigation, it's important for you governing body members to remember that or be aware that persons that are affected by the decision of a governing body can file a suit in circuit court. Now, the circuit court suit must be filed within 60 days of the alleged violation. Now, with suits that are filed under ORS 192.680, the court can void the governing body's decision or action. Now, with complaints filed with the Ethics Commission, we cannot void any decisions or actions that have been taken by the governing body. Now, if the court determines that there was intentional disregard of the law or willful misconduct by the governing body, the court may award a successful plaintiff attorney payment of fees by the governing body or its public body. Now, the governing body members may be jointly liable to the governing body or the public body for the amount paid by the body. Now, before we even get to that point, I want to make sure that you reach out to us for any advice. So before we get to the complaints, investigation, or sanction, reach out to us for advice. All right, the next part is going to be training requirement. Training requirement basically is this: if a governing body has a total expenditure of $1 million in a fiscal year, the governing bodies, let me reword that. If a governing body has a total expenditure of $1 million in a fiscal year, each governing body member needs to take a public meetings law training at least once during the member's term of office. Now, a person serving on multiple governing bodies may attend a single training to satisfy the requirements so long as it occurs during each term of office. Now, all members of governing bodies are encouraged to attend even if they are not required. All right, so we covered all the topics in public meetings law. Now, before we can get into how you get credit for the training today, is there any questions that you have? All right, let me jump over to chat so I can see if there's any questions. Okay, none. All right, so no questions means we go straight to the polling. So here you go. What resources are available to analyze if a governing body follows the provision of public meetings law? Choose all that apply. A, the Ethics Commission. B, the Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual. C, the governing body's council. D, your association. Or E, none, you are all on your own. Choose all that apply. A through D, yeah. A and B, okay, close. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you're never all on your own, okay? So you can always reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you folks. So last one, this is one that you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but after this training, how confident do you feel in your knowledge to follow public meetings law? Usually this is an anonymous poll, but on this one I get to see everyone's answer. So you feeling brave, go ahead and drop it in. If not, no pressure. Yeah, somewhat confident. Yeah, awesome. I saw the D in there. Great. Yeah. All right. Soft B or high C. Awesome. I like that. C minus. All right. Well, the idea here is it's an overview. And so the idea is, yeah, you're supposed to, it's not a substitute for the statutes, but you should walk away feeling a little bit better than you did before. So, all right. So let's talk about those of you that participated in the full live training today. Congratulations. You have met the training requirement for public meetings law. So as Lex mentioned earlier, in order to receive the certificate, you need to be logged in for the entire training individually and participate in the entire live training. Now, we will be sending out 2 emails after this, probably later today or tomorrow. The first email you'll get will be an email bulletin with all the resources and all the links that we talked about today. If you have feedback to share on this training, there'll also be a link to join in on that training. Now, if you completed this training, you'll also get a separate email with your certificate. Now, just heads up, it's going to come from training@ogec.oregon.gov. That email has the certificate. Okay, so you should be getting that soon. And just heads up, because the certificate is a PDF, it may go to your spam or junk folders. If you don't see it, just look for it in those boxes. If you can't find them, then reach out to us. We'll help you with that. And last part of this is where I say thank you for taking this training today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity for me and Lex to provide you with the training today. If you have any questions, we'll stick around. But other than that, again, thank you for the opportunity. It has been a pleasure. You're welcome, Jenny.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you both. Well, all 3 of you. So appreciate all of your guidance and info. And for those that have questions or want to listen to this, it will be recorded and posted. Yeah, any other things for OGEC? OGEC, that's a new one for me. So anything for OGEC crew before we let them go about the rest of their day? Well, thank you all again. Appreciate you. Nice to meet you. And yeah, I've got questions, so you'll probably hear from us from time to time. Make sure
All right, we're highly anticipating your questions. So
yeah,
send them that way.
Yeah, right on. Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate
All right,
it.
thanks. See ya.
All right. I think that just leaves us with public comments. I'm pretty sure we're early, right, Christy? Wasn't that set for 3:30?
I'm not looking at the agenda.
Yeah, let me see if I've got it. I think I've got it saved here.
Let me see.
3:30. Well, I don't think we're gonna hang for a half hour. I'm not sure if that violates public meeting law or not.
Should have asked.
Did they already leave? Call them back. Well, I will pause. I'll open it for public comment now. So if you have public comment, and you are here and went through that with us, feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, that sort of thing. Adam Peterson has given the stamp of approval. Caleb in the chat just saying it was good to meet everybody in person. Yes, agreed. Anyone else for public comment? Not hearing any. Is Jackie still with us? I'm just curious how I'm doing on my pause. So that's what I was asking. Okay, I'm seeing a shake from Jolene. Well, then, folks, I think that we'll call it. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening and engaging. Next meeting is September 2nd from 3 to 5, new time. Same great crew, new time. So, Christy or SOC crew, anything before we go about the rest of our day?
I don't think so. Thanks for being here. We'll
Right
get
on. Well,
recording out to you all soon.
enjoy the rest of your
see
summer, folks. Yeah, stay
some
safe.
of you tomorrow at the Youth IDD Mental Health Summit. If you'll be there, I'll see you later.
Yes.
I was
Absolutely.
planning on being there in person, but I will not be able to make it. So I registered for online as well.
Cool. I'm glad at least you're able to, get the info. Jesus. Sounds good. All right, gang.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.